For the last videos I've made, I've discussed my eternal love for point-and-click adventure games from the 90s. In fact, the last 6 or so videos I've made on this channel have been aimed entirely at the Monkey Island series, so rather than continue to beat this dead horse, I figured I would take a short hiatus and instead discuss some of the other prominent video games from the 90s. For example, Broken Sword. Broken Sword for me was a far more different stroke from the player-friendly LucasArts games I was accustomed to. Originally released in 1996, Broken Sword was conceived by video game designer Charles Cecil and his team at Revolution Software, detailing the story of an American man known as George Stobart, who is touring Europe and happens to be caught in an explosion organised by a killer clown. This leads him to meet journalist Nico Collard. Together they start to unravel a conspiracy involving a new order of Knights Templars. Of course, 1996 was a long time ago, but in 2009, Charles Cecil decided to return back to the classic adventure and bring it to new audiences, with a director's cut being released on Nintendo Wii, the DS, mobile phones and PC. The director's cut brought a few changes into the game, such as Cecil creating more content for the player, allowing them to control our favourite French journalist Nico, and details of our own investigations. Now, normally I'm quick to try to play the latest version of a game. It's usually the updated and best way to play the game with exciting new features. Since it's the director's cut, this would be the intended way for the developers to have you play the game. But for me, I would personally advocate for playing the originals instead. My reasoning for this is because I have quite a few issues with the director's cut actually. The video will actually explore both versions of the game and explain why I think the director's cut is an inferior version of this amazing game. In fact, I believe that the original Broken Sword still looks amazing 20 years later, with fantastic cutscenes which I often see compared to resembling animation styles from Renaissance Disney. So it really says a lot that they came in and redid a lot of this 13 years later and somehow made it look even worse, with awkward animation that looks as if I've moved it myself through Sony Vegas Pro. Granted, Broken Sword the director's cut does include additional content with sections that include Nico as a playable character with new additional aspects to the story, but I'm also fairly certain I couldn't tell you anything from it that is significant aside from just being there. I would honestly believe that I was all the better without playing it. But let's begin. The original Broken Sword story begins with George Stobart sitting outside of a Parisian cafe having come over from California. For some reason, nobody seems to like him because of this.
Freeze! Hold it, right there.
Whoa, don't shoot. I'm innocent. I'm an American.
Can't make up your mind, huh?
George is sitting happily on the sidewalk when a clown appears and drops an accordion, causing an explosion that could have killed George. Almost immediately, George decides he needs to look into this further.
Why won't you tell me about this clown?
Why do you want to get involved?
Don't say revenge. Don't say revenge. Revenge? That's it. I'm getting out of here.
As such, his travels take him around all of Paris, including, of course, their glamorous sewers, because chasing a killer clown down into the sewers is always a great idea.
Hi, Georgie. Aren't you going to say hello?
It's an interesting start to the game and immediately sets the events in motion. However, the director's cut instead opens with a ginormous Nico over the Parisian landscape.
This enormous woman will devour us all! Ah!
It opens with her approaching a man for an interview where he is murdered, detailing events Nico mentions in the original game. This allows the player to play as Nico and unravel a mystery surrounding her father's involvement with the Templars. Now, I'll never say no to some additional content, but really there isn't that much added to the story. In fact, after uncovering the secrets surrounding her father, Nico decides that no one must ever know, and that's really just it for the plot.
Whatever he was doing, he'd had good reason to keep it secret. I decided I would respect that and tell nobody.
But what about gameplay, I hear you ask? Well, did you ask for sliding puzzles? Because you better believe you're getting those. The director's cut has a weird habit of sprinkling in some puzzles that make me wonder if the Grand Master of the Neo-Templars is actually Professor Layton. These puzzles are not just limited to the additional Nico segments either, but have instead been awkwardly placed into the George sections as well. For example, while in the Montfaucon church, George can use a lens to peek through a statue's telescope to see a hidden image. In the original game, all he needs to do is put the lens on and look through it. In the remake, however, for some reason this becomes a kaleidoscope puzzle. Of course, on the hunt for a killer clown, there's bound to be some villains in the way, including gangsters. Flap and Guido hang outside of a hotel searching every person who leaves the hotel. It's through them that the player discovers their first pitfall in the original game. While in the hotel, George finds an ancient manuscript, and if he is unfortunate enough to leave the manuscript, he'll find himself at an untimely end, and the player will need to restart the game by reloading a save.
Is this what you're after, Guido?
See, that's C.
I can explain everything. Well, almost everything.
Too late. You're on your way to feed the fishes.
I'm allergic to fish. I break out in blotches when I eat tuna.
Let's go.
However, the director's cut eradicates all means of dying. Instead of allowing the player to leave the hotel with the manuscript, the game stops the player in their tracks and instead explicitly tells the player that that was a dumb decision, and it will not let them do this. The original game is filled with pitfalls like this that can hinder the player, but the director cut Uno reverses these deaths, making it impossible for George to die. While it's likely to make the game a bit more accessible for more casual gamers, such as those who would play on iOS, it does remove certain puzzles and a significant amount of the charm from the game. The best example of this is while George is splunking in the Paris sewers and stumbles upon a Neo-Templar meeting. The player can ignore the obviously bad idea and head down the stairs to confront the Templars in one of the more humorous deaths in the game.
This was it. The conspiracy was revealed. Okay, nobody move. I'm making a citizen's arrest. At last, I had them. I could see the fear in their eyes as their little scheme came to pieces. You're all going away for a very long time. And you can just drop those guns. You're impressing nobody.
However, this is completely lost in the director's cut, where the game simply refuses to let George go down the stairs. So of course, the director's cut could not have this at all and gave us Broken Sword, Little Baby Cut. At moments where fast decision makings would be critical in the main game, this is instead replaced with awkward silences before ultimately doing it for the player.
Well, if it isn't the great detective and his beautiful assistant, it's going to be a pleasure killing the pair of you.
George, what are we going to do? Come on, George, think of something.
What do you suggest?
Well, this place is full of explosives. What about that torch?
What about it?
Just grab it and throw it at the explosives.
Come on, Nico. We're leaving.
You fools!
This is not a good replacement. I guess the best way to scale this in difficulty is from Monkey Island to Space Quest. It feels as if the developers were aiming for an adventure filled with danger and death, which would bring us a bit closer to Space Quest. However, for the remake, it feels they tried to dumb it down a bit, so it's more like Monkey Island. But that doesn't really work. Broken Sword is not a fun family game like Monkey Island, it needs to have tricks and turns. The director's cut also has a funny way of dealing with violence. Obviously, in a game where you're up against assassins and murderous Templars, you'd expect there to be some sort of violence. The original game was full of these moments, but instead the director's cut takes it upon itself to try and censor a lot of this. Now let's take for example the scene where Sean Fitzgerald leaves the pub and is knocked down by the red Ferrari. The original shows him bleeding from the impact, but the director's cut instead censors this because, ooh, blood. Something similar happens at the end of the game where George is strangled by one of the Templars. In the original, he's saved by Inspector Rosso who throwing knifes his assailant. However, the director's cut instead awkwardly replaces this with a gunshot, with a very awkward gunfire appearing to the side to make it clear. Now this isn't to say there aren't aspects that are better in the director's cut. For example, I actually do quite like the close-ups they do for puzzles, like when the player needs to use a soap bar to create a key replica. In the original, the player just uses the items together and it's done. However, the director's cut includes a few more steps, which while seem pretty pointless, don't seem to detract from the original puzzle. However, some puzzles also appear to have been dumbed down for whatever reason. The best example of this is what is known as the game's infamous goat puzzle. So infamous that it actually has its own Wikipedia article. Perhaps it's only because I've known the game for years, but I could swear that the solution to this puzzle is not as hard as it should be. In the original game, the solution is to get knocked down by the goat to one side, then quickly get up and run to the other, which isn't dreadfully brain-picking, but according to Charles Cecil, was an unfair puzzle due to the time restrictions not being included up until this point. However, the director's cut instead changes this, so instead the player simply has to run across and pull the plough to tangle the goat. Perhaps Cecil decided to reduce the difficulty to make the game more accessible. However, other puzzles seem to also have been removed, if you can even call them puzzles. The best example of this is in McDevitt's pub in Lochmarn. In the original, you need to snag a bar towel from under Doyle, while waiting for him to take a drink so you can grab it underneath. However, in the director's cut, this is instead placed further down in the bar and easier to grab. I'm not too sure why this would be the case, but it seems to have simplified this matter. Eventually, George's adventures takes him to Syria. Broken Sword's original version also appears to have had a bug, which I noticed when I was playing around in Syria. One puzzle requires George to pet a cat, so you can ring a bell and knock a statue down to sell for $50. However, since I'm an absolute pro gamer, I impatiently kept clicking on the cat until it ran off, leaving me with absolutely no way to get the $50 to continue the game, because George is a cheapskate. For some reason, the remake also removed one of the characters, although they were never really necessary for the plot or interactable with, so I'm not too sure why. While in Syria, George visits the Bull's Head Hill, which acts as the best proof of why I'm not too keen on the director's cut. Can informs George he gets to choose how he dies, like a man or like a dog. Of course, begging for your life immediately causes Can to shoot you.
Hey, look now, don't kill me. I've got money. Maybe we can cut a deal.
You disappoint me.
So George decides he will die like a man, but quite literally has another trick up his sleeve. George uses the hand buzzer to shock Can, thus knocking him down and dropping his gun. At this moment, quick reflexes are needed. Does George go for the gun or not? If he doesn't act in time or tries to go for the gun, George gets shot. Instead, George needs to make a daring escape off the cliff just in time before Can recovers. However, in the director's cut, here's where that part is thrown out the window, or down the cliff as it were. As you cannot die in this version, this just leads to an awkward moment where you tell him you will die like a dog.
Hey, look now, don't kill me. I've got money. Maybe we can cut a deal.
You disappoint me.
Okay, you're the boss. I'll take my medicine.
I should like to shake your hand.
George instead also jumps off without any prompt, which in itself just feels like it's removing another puzzle to remove a lot of tension from this game. Now, one thing I'd like to stress is that while I'm pretty overall negative about the director's cut in this video, I would absolutely guarantee that I would still have loved it had it been the first iteration of the game. Charles Cecil and his team made a truly wonderful game with such a captivating story, but I would believe that the original is the definitive way to play. The original is more daring and thrilling, whereas the DC just feels as if it just falls flat. Fortunately, they've made the original game available as free DLC, so you'll be able to try both versions for yourself and give your own verdict. So what are your views? Do you have a preference on versions, or do you have your own views? I love reading about your thoughts, so please comment down below. If you liked the video, please also think about liking and sharing it, as this would go a long way to supporting me. I'll also be posting more content, so please consider subscribing for more. Thanks once again for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye bye.